This is the IBJ podcast for the week of July the 8th, 2024, brought to you by Taft. I'm your host, Mason King. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. Our guest this week is Ben Rose, a longtime creative force in the Indianapolis arts community, who recently was named the inaugural artistic director of the fledgling Indianapolis Black Theatre Co. If you want to think about it as a startup, the theater has a long runway thanks to a campaign that raised $1.5 million. A part of Rose's job as artistic director will be to establish revenue streams that can maintain momentum once that first round of funding runs out. Rose has several outside-the-box ideas for supporting the company while serving the careers of company members both on and off the stage. They're influenced in part by a varied career that took him to Atlanta and Los Angeles for significant periods of time, as well as his professional experience in several artistic modes, including stage acting, writing, videography, filmmaking, and photography. And he has learned to see the world through several lenses due to his unusual upbringing as a mixed-race child from Indianapolis who was adopted by a white family at a very early age and grew up in relatively rural Tipton. In this week's episode of the podcast, Rose discusses how he forged a career in the arts through what he calls fortunate backdoor opportunities and developed his vision for how Indianapolis Black Theatre Co. can sustain itself while helping its members find work in other venues. He also delves into the group's first official production, which has something to say about taking professional risks in places where you might not have felt welcome in the past. It's a stage reading of a play about a groundbreaking Black woman who became the first professional female baseball player as a member of the Indianapolis Clowns in the previously all-male Negro Leagues. Here's our conversation. It's my pleasure to welcome to the podcast Ben Rose, Artistic Director of the Indianapolis Black Theatre Co. Thanks for making time to come to the studio today. It is the afternoon of July 3rd and getting fairly hot outside, so I appreciate you coming over.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
Let me start with your story. I take it that you were born in Indianapolis, but that you grew up in Tipton?
Yeah, I was born in Indianapolis, interracial couple. I ended up getting adopted because of racial tensions within the families. And a white family in Tipton County adopted me about 4 months and grew up there, raised there, graduated from high school there, and then eventually went down to Bloomington for school.
Wow. So, I mean,
there's a lot to unpack there.
Right off the bat.
Let's get into it.
Yeah. I mean, you have been carrying around your fair share of identity issues from 4 months old, basically. Almost seems like you could do nothing but get into the arts. That's a lot of material. I mean, I assume you've been drawing on that for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because my parents, we didn't talk a lot about it. For the most part, they're really conservative, really good-natured, loving people, not super communicative. It was an era where they felt like if we just raise a child and love them, everything will work out. And to a certain extent, that's true. But the whole sense of having to deal with institutional racism, microaggressions, all those kind of things wasn't something that they really understood. And as a kid, one of the things that happens with a lot of adopted kids, especially in interracial adoptions, is that they feel a sense of wanting to please and thankfulness is kind of impressed upon you, that you're being saved in a sense. So you don't want to make trouble. You don't want to hurt people's feelings. And so I just internalized a lot of that. And so I didn't discover a lot about my background. I didn't even really realize I was biracial until I was 18. Because I was very dark-skinned for a biracial kid, and especially in the summertime. And that wasn't something with my adoption that my parents really had a lot of information about or just talked about in general. So there's a lot of stuff that kind of flew under the radar that as I grew into adulthood, I was like, I need to research this and find out more information about my background.
What did your folks do?
So my dad was a teacher for 30 years. He was a music teacher, choral instructor. And my mom was a secretary in a elementary school.
So you've been many things in your professional life. Stage actor, videographer, photographer, filmmaker, and a community builder. We're going to focus a little bit more on stage today, but I just wanted folks to be aware just from the beginning, you are a multidisciplinary, hyphenate person in the arts. So what were your first experiences on the stage?
Oh, man. So in 5th grade, I did The Jungle Book. I was Mowgli.
Oh, right on.
Of course.
I was going to say.
People said I was typecast, and they could have been right. But that was my first and probably last stage experience for a long time, because I wasn't really into theater in school because a lot of the productions didn't speak to me at all. And like Oklahoma, Barbara Seville, things like that. I just wasn't into it. I was more into sports and writing. Writing was really where a lot of it started. My first stage performances, really the first major one was the Jazz Kitchen. They were having a musician's open mic, and I took my ex-wife at the time, kind of a date night thing. And I'd been writing poetry for a long time, and I never did spoken word out loud. And I thought, this might be kind of cool if I can get them to let me do this with some of the musicians. And so I talked to the manager, and at first he was like, no, absolutely not. And then I think he saw how passionate I really was about it. And he thought, well, it's a boring Monday night. Cool. And so I asked a couple of musicians to back me, and I read this jazz piece. And this is before we had a lot of spoken word venues, and people they lost it. They loved it. I mean, it was so empowering. It was amazing, the energy. After I got off the mic, people were like, where are you from? You're not even from here, are you? And all this different stuff. And so that really that's when the bug kind of hit me. And then shortly after that, I got my first role at the Phoenix Theater in 2 Trains Running, an August Wilson piece. And I'd been doing professional theater since then.
That's incredible. How old were you when you went up on stage at the Jazz Kitchen?
Probably about 20, 25.
Okay, yeah.
25 or 26.
So you went to IU, you studied English.
Yeah, I was an English major.
Okay. What is it that you went into right after college?
So I dropped out of college first. I thought I was going to write this Jack Kerouac-like novel. I was just in that mindset. There's not a business involved here. I just have all this passion. I'm tired of my English classes, and I'm getting decent grades. I'm just going to drop out. And so I ended up running a housing project in Indianapolis, just down from the Walker Theater in Ransom Place. And that kind of started cementing in me the history of Indianapolis, because I hadn't lived in Indianapolis. And so I started learning a lot about the Black history, but I was running a housing project. And at that time, I thought I wanted to be an apostolic preacher at the time. I got really into church, really deep, but it was all kind of performance oriented in a way, finding my way back to that.
Yeah, the semiotics of theater and church are very similar.
Very similar, very similar. So yeah, that was, when I first came back to Indianapolis, and I was, from there, I was always doing a lot of odd jobs, anywhere from working at, in warehouses to, man, I can't even think of all the different, I had a lot of sales jobs, telemarketing, but was always doing side projects, trying to get started in either film or taking extra classes in communications to learn more about telecom and things like that. So it's been a long journey.
So you get up on stage, Jazz Kitchen, works out great. And then did that then kind of lead you towards, well, what else can I do on stage? I'm assuming that, for example, when you go to Phoenix, you had to audition, you had to have something prepared.
So actually I didn't. I came in through the back door. So somebody had seen me performing spoken word and really found the energy compelling. And there was a role in 2 Trains called Hambone. And Hambone just sits and eats beans at the counter and kind of emotes and grunts. And they were like, this is a good role for a poet. We'll throw him in there. And so the costume designer at the time, Sherry Himes, she was the one that, went to the director and said, I got this guy I think will work out for this. Well, it ended up that the character playing Wolf flaked out. And I begged to get that role, and they let me do it. And I don't want to say that my background prepared me to be a natural actor, because I was always acting for people. Being the only Black kid in what used to be a sundown town, I grew up very conscious of what people say versus how they felt. So I understood the dynamics of being on stage with other actors and performing, because I was always performing roles for people that were either to their liking or not to their liking, or skirting those different edges of people's sensibilities. So for me, it was natural, and it felt natural. And I think that they saw the talent, and then Brian Fonseca just kept inviting me back for more roles. So I'm very fortunate, but a lot of the roles I've gotten is because somebody dropped out or couldn't do what they said they could do. And I jumped right in there.
So you were doing more theater roles in town, but you also were pursuing opportunities as a filmmaker, as a producer. What was kind of the vision at that point once you kind of decided this maybe is more to my liking than preaching?
There's a lot of things that were going on. I had taken a job at Channel 13, and that got me started in production work, which was a very viable living at the time. And it also brought me closer. I was writing. So I originally had wrote a couple screenplays, and the thought was, I was like, well, I don't live in Hollywood. I want to produce these things, or I want to do these things. I didn't have any directing experience. I didn't know how to edit. I didn't know how to light. I didn't know how to do anything. I was like, how am I going to talk to any of these people about producing? So I started taking classes, but then I was also working in the field, learning about cameras, things like that, trying to cobble my own equipment together. I ended up getting a job at Comcast as a producer, so that allowed me to write, shoot, and edit and access to equipment. And that ended up taking me down to Atlanta. I'd kind of hit a wall. I was doing a lot of theater work. And to be honest, I got really frustrated because I didn't have a degree in theater. So when you're trying to get into the Lord theaters and the equity houses, I was fortunate that I was working at the Phoenix, but the Phoenix was all about sticking their finger up to the man and doing all this progressive work, which fit great for me. But the other theaters weren't necessarily, I didn't fit. Just being very blunt, a lot of the equity theaters that were, when they did their Black plays, they wanted a darker skinned, more Black representing actor. So there wasn't always these nuanced spaces for multicultural actors. And there weren't that many roles in the first place. And a lot of times they wanted to give them to people that had BAs or MFAs in acting. So I just couldn't find enough work. So I was like, I'm going to go to Atlanta. So I transferred with my job down there. And because I had a lot of freedom and access to equipment, I shot my first feature film down there from something that I wrote. And I never show it to anybody because it was terrible. But I learned so much in the process. I was, working with actors down there, doing a lot of that. And I ended up losing my job while I was down there. I was doing so much work that the company, there were people that were jealous at the company and felt like I was double dipping because they didn't understand I was working more in film and they thought I was producing commercials on the side. And it got really messy. And so I ended up coming back to Indiana. My son was being born up here. Driving back and forth was not a great thing. I wanted to be closer to family. So when I came back, I did the Indie Filmmakers Boot Camp because there weren't a lot of networking going on in film. There weren't a lot of people trained in how to work in teams. So I was like, let me put this boot camp together for writers, actors, and directors, and we'll make some films together. I was doing the 48-hour film festivals at the time, too. Got about 7 awards over 3 years with that.
And this is about 2010-ish.
This is, right around 2010. I came back in 2008, and I was also enrolled at the Arts Institute, getting a degree in photography. So I was just always doing a lot of things at once, juggling a lot of balls in the air. But yeah, that's how really my worlds with theater and film started to really kind of coalesce together at that point.
And then you also spent some time in Los Angeles.
I did. I was there in LA like 2017 to about 2019. And my plan was really not to stay there. At the time, I was working for Amazon, did a lot of freelance photography work through their warehouses for a lot of the products that were coming through. And so I was working as a contractor for them. And I didn't exactly transfer out there, but I heard there was openings out in California at their Riverside location. And so I just, as I often do, I picked up. My kids were in high school. My youngest kids were in high school. It was a time where I felt like I needed a sabbatical, really. I'd really gotten to a point where I was, as a creative, kind of frustrated and going through a lot of economic hardship over the years. And I just needed an opportunity to kind of be by myself because I'd raised my 2 oldest kids by myself. And so all this time that I was doing work with the Phoenix and working in Atlanta, I was also raising 2 kids by myself as well, which was difficult, but also gave me a lot of material, to work from in terms as a creative. But yeah, I went out to Cali for a year. I was shooting photography for about 3 days a week. And the rest of the time I was just out, just exploring Cali, seeing the scene, learning a lot about what it would take for a lot of people that are moving from areas like this to go out there to really make it. Because I was older and because I had kids, that was never really my intention because the cost of living is so difficult out there, but also knowing that it's possible and there are certain ways to do it. And that's taken into my work now. It's easy for me to counsel people on the right way to move out there if they're going to do it.
Let's take a quick break so we can hear from our sponsor. This is the IBJ Podcast.
Taft, today's modern law firm. With more than 800 attorneys in 8 primary Midwest markets and the District of Columbia, we provide solutions to the business issues facing middle market and emerging companies alike. We do this through a highly collaborative and inclusive team approach. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
All right, we're back with this week's episode of the IBJ Podcast and my conversation with Ben Rose of the Indianapolis Black Theatre Company. Now, in October, you were named as the inaugural artistic director of Indianapolis Black Theatre Company. And the job, as I understand it, is laying the groundwork for a professional theater company. What is the origin story of the theater company? Because it's a little bit unusual. My sense is, this is a creation of the district theater. How did that all work?
Yeah, so I haven't seen anybody here locally do anything close to this before, but mostly I think with Brian Payne at the helm had a lot to do with, used to be Theater on the Square.
Yeah, that building used to be Theater on the Square.
And it was there for, 30 years. Kind of changed management and was in not a great place. So CICF, much thanks to Brian Payne, kind of stepped in and kind of shored it up. And I think moving forward, they saw the need to really implant themselves in the community. And a lot of the Black community was utilizing that building and that space for productions that they couldn't do in other places. And they did a lot of rentals for people. And it's a great location for those kind of things.
And there are at least a couple theaters in there. Is that right?
So we are the only resident theater. So The intention was the district raised, I hate to lead with this, but they did raise $1.5 million through the help with matching grants with Lilly to start a resident Black theater company.
Right.
And that's a process.
Just to orient folks, so we've had Brian Payne on the podcast before. This is the Central Indiana Community Foundation, which exists, primarily to raise money and distribute money to improve the quality of life.
Right.
And Brian Payne was, who I believe at one point was the business manager of IRT.
I think so. And he was the board president of the district as well.
Right. And he was very involved in the district theater.
Yeah. And he's a theater guy. He likes theater. He comes from San Diego area. Like that's his thing. So he's always been a good friend to the theater community. But the board of the district very much was involved in the fundraising of this. And then, of course, Lilly with the matching grants. I think there were a lot of people in the community that saw this. It's time because there was no support system for Black theater here locally, but there were a lot of people trying to do stuff. And so the beneficiary of that, I slid in, like I do a lot of times, I slid in the back door because when they started these conversations, I wasn't invited to the table. A lot of people thought that when you're doing other things, people forget your focus. They're like, oh, he went to Cali or now he's back or he's doing this or he's doing that. But the timing just was really great for me in terms of the vision of what I wanted to do that was different than what most theater companies were doing.
It's not as if they had everything totally sketched out, not even sketched out, like in black and white. They were looking for ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. They had put together a relative budget for 2 to 3 years. But yeah, I think they really were looking for, I've done it. We didn't have a name at the time. I named it that. I made the logo, putting together, the board, putting together, the website, bank accounts, everything. Now that we had pro bono work from Barnes and Thornburg to help us establish the not-for-profit status, but really this is from ground up.
So the way I understand it, Indianapolis Black Theatre Company will be a resident theater company within the district theater.
So it is a resident company being within the district theater, fostered by the district theater, but it's its own entity. So we hope to help bolster what's happening at the district theater, but we are our own organization, and at any time we can be whatever we need to be.
So lay out the mission.
Our mission really is to elevate Black stories, to empower and encourage other Black cultural arts organizations, and also spread beyond Indianapolis, creating a platform for Black creatives that goes beyond just putting on shows.
The base expectation that people will have is, oh, you're going to put on plays that reflect the Black experience. That's going to happen. But, I mean, there's so much more.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, where to start? So, I mean, for me, I think what I'm really doing is trying to provide the resources and the support system for younger creatives that I didn't have over the last 20 years, the things that I needed. So as it took me 3 or 4, maybe 5 years to realize I wasn't going to make a living as a theater actor alone, especially as a person of color. It really wasn't going to happen. And so that was a traumatic part in my career where it was hurtful because I really wanted to do this. I really wanted to focus in on just acting and do just that. And I didn't have anybody to counsel me or give me resources or say, well, here's how you need to supplement or, things like that. So one is giving back in a way that helping actors to become sustainable, which means working in film, working in commercial work, doing training videos, invading the Cincinnati, St. Louis, Detroit markets. And so providing what we want to do is provide agency representation for our company members. And so instead of belonging to one of the top 3 agencies that work within Indianapolis and being one of maybe 2,000 to 3,000 people on their roster, we have somebody that's focusing on their career, that's putting their resumes out there, that's calling agents in other places on their behalf to get them work. The other side of that is that theater is not really a sustainable business the way the model is now. It's something that's only available through endowments, corporate giving, personal legacy giving. It doesn't make money. 30, maybe at most 40% of ticket sales, and this is any size theater in the nation, goes back to their annual budget. That's about how much, less than half of the money that they need to operate comes from ticket sales. So that's not where you're going to survive at. But as an agency that's helping our actors grow and eventually other people outside of that, taking a small percentage of what they bring back for the work that we find them, that's way more sustainable than ticket sales, especially if you get to what we're also pushing is getting into original content, producing original content. So I'm getting ready to announce a national Black playwriting contest where the winner will receive a development deal through Indianapolis Black Theatre Company, and we'll produce that play in the next season. Now, what that does is that allows us to not only premiere something here in Indianapolis, but I can premiere it in Fort Wayne. I can go to Michigan City, Evansville. There's a population outside of Indianapolis of the Black community of over 250,000 people. So there's pockets of these Black communities all over Kokomo, Anderson, Peru that don't get the cultural representation that we get here in Indianapolis. So I can extend the life of a writer's work and an actor's. Instead of just hiring them for a 6-week run, I may have 3 months worth of work for them from this. And I can negotiate the terms of that because it's original content. Now, eventually we can take something from stage to screen. So that's where it gets really exciting, where if we're able to produce something in terms of a small, low budget feature out of something that we've created here locally, and that can make its way to Netflix, you're talking about a lot of money returning back in residuals right back to the theater, which is kind of the origin story for most actors. That's where they get their skills. That's where they learn how to really dig into their character work. But theater benefits the least from what is the long range when people get into go to LA, go to Chicago, get into making films at that level. And if they are making tons of money, they credit their stuff to the theater. but the money doesn't necessarily go back because theater's been kind of standoffish about other mediums. They're the snobby, intellectual, we're theater and that's something else over there. And it's true, they are different mediums. But in today's world, there's so much crisscross between the music world, the theater world, the film world, animation, voiceover work. They all play in the same sandbox, whether they're drawing lines or not. And I just want to make sure that, especially as Black creatives, we have a platform that we can benefit from. And that's super important, carrying that intellectual property, that original content stays with us. Even as a city, when people start to look to us and say, what's going on in Indianapolis? They had that national playwriting contest and now they produced this really cool play from it. And then they made a short film and like they've got, all this stuff happening. This is what California does. They don't care about anybody else. They're like, it's all about us. Come license our things. New York has Broadway. Everybody's trying to license what happens off of Broadway. But when we start creating our own work and people want to license our things with origin stories like Tony Stone that happen here, then we're doing a whole different thing for theater.
So in the playwriting contest, I submit a play. It's chosen for the development deal. Does that mean that the company at least partially owns the play?
So we would work a development deal where we have the ability to produce the work. And then also if we say, hey, we want to try to do something in the film industry, we would negotiate terms directly with the writer. And that's something, it's open. Because if you're a writer and you go to an agency out of Hollywood or someplace else, the terms are kind of pre-baked about how much you can make and what your return is. This is a situation where we can say, hey, do you want to go half on this? Or how do you want to split this up? When we produce something, we have a platform that people could actually download products. So we could potentially, with their permission, have the show happening live, but it could also be streamed live to an audience too.
So you could produce a show here in Indianapolis, and then you could take it to communities around Indiana that have significant Black populations.
I mean, we did a test. So we did a co-production called Plantanos and Collard Greens. And so we produced that in Anderson. We did a show in Muncie for Ball State. Then we did several shows in Anderson, and then we brought the show here. So we built the set here. We rehearsed our actors here, and then we took it on the road. I literally drove the U-Haul, unloaded the set multiple times to see what the mechanism was and what pitfalls we might come up against and how we do that. And it was just a learning curve so that now we are prepared to be able to say, okay, this is the amount of money that it takes to do this. This is the manpower. This is the rehearsal time. This is the travel time, how much we need to pay actors to be able to take these shows because it's been too expensive. That's why writers try and write a cast of like 12, 15 people and we're going to tour this. And it's like, no, we need 4 or less. We need this manageable because it's really expensive. You got hotel rooms, things like that, meals, all that. So we've got a good grip on that now. And we think that there's a huge audience out there that's underserved. And this leads to other things too. This leads to taking musicians from our market after we develop relationships with people and bring them theater. They might want music too, short film productions. All these things is building a network and a fabric for Black creatives to platform off of.
So you start off with $1.5 million in seed or startup capital, if you will, and that's supposed to be spread out over like 2 or 3 years. Okay. And then after that, what would you imagine your budget is going to be?
The other great thing that they're doing for us is whatever shows that we do now, the ticket sales are going right into our bank account. So we're able to build up an escrow so that we won't be poor as soon as the tap gets turned off. But it's also a framework of time that allows us to develop our product, but also develop collaborators and supporters of the work as well. So that right now I'm focusing on the creative. I don't have to be a fundraiser as much. A lot of our local artistic directors really are more fundraisers than they are artistic directors, and that's unfortunate. So this gives us an opportunity to do that. I'm also really interested in developing an endowment to help with the operating capital. So that's one of the big things is I've got kind of a 5-year plan to really get an endowment established. You need that operating budget to be there every year so that you're not just working off people that feel like they're volunteering their time.
So on July 13th, Indianapolis Black Theatre Company will have, is it correct to say this is the first official production?
Yeah, it's a reading. I don't want to minimize it, but it's not a full production. It's definitely seeding the production that will do the full thing in September.
But this is a premiere for Indianapolis.
Yeah,
and so
regional premiere.
Right, and it's Tony Stone, Tony Stone
mm-hmm.
by Chicago playwright Lydia Diamond. The show has a lot of relevance for Indianapolis. Tell us what it's about.
A friend of mine, Don Burris, we used to work together at the Phoenix Theater. He calls me up one day and he says, "Hey, have you heard about this play, Tony Stone, or do you know who Tony Stone is?" I'm like, "No idea." He's like, "Well, she was the first professional baseball player, or female baseball player, and she's Black. She played for the Indianapolis Clowns." I'm like, "What?" It's almost like finding out about Major Taylor, you know, right, for the first time. Exactly. You're like, wow, this cyclist that was worldwide renowned from Indianapolis, Crown Point area. And so to find out, and I didn't know a lot I knew about the Indianapolis Clowns. I didn't know a lot of history behind them. I knew they had played at Busch Stadium, but to find out that they had a female baseball player and she was the first professional baseball player, I was like, wow, how does no one know about this? And there's a play about it. So I'm like, this is a no-brainer. We have to produce this for Indianapolis. And there's just so many tie-ins with the history as far as, you know, the Indianapolis Indians, the Historical Society. You know, we really think that this is something that all the people that are interested in Indiana Avenue and just Black history in Indianapolis in general, this is a great story.
So you say it's a reading. How's that different from what people would expect from a regular stage production?
It's very similar. I mean, the actors will have the scripts, so the pressure is not on them to, you know, have this thing memorized. There may be some light sound cues and things like that to help develop, you know, the atmosphere. But a lot of it is about hearing the characters and hearing the story. And it's an opportunity for people to come and get involved with the story. So I'm inviting a lot of people that have community organizations, tie-ins with the subject matter to come and hear and listen. And especially, you know, at a price point, you know, a lot of people, when you get up to $30 and $40 a ticket for these productions, can be prohibitive for people to bring families or to bring more than one person. So we're trying to make it a very low buy-in to get involved with us as a theater company too, to learn, do a meet and greet beforehand with the new company members that we've taken on, and also to afterwards say what they think about the play and what its relevance might be to now, or I'd love to volunteer to be an usher for this, or things like that. So it's really more of a community gathering than us just doing a production for people to come and sit in their seat and watch and clap and then go home.
How many people would you expect to be in the company?
So right now we've got 12 actors involved and 2 directors. I'm looking for about 3 more men. We've been light on our male actors in the troupe. So I'm looking for about 15 folks. We're going to bring in writers as well. So we've got a full contingent of actors, writers, directors, and then we'll slowly begin bringing in technical people too, as well as designers. So at the end of the day, we have about 20 folks in this company that we're kind of building from the ground up.
So to be a member, an actor member of a theater company, doesn't mean you have a full-time job typically. I mean, these people get paid by production or?
So what we're doing is I've got a local director that's going to be starting his own training program. So about 6 of our actors we're sponsoring. So they'll actually be training with this director and getting paid to do that work on about $1,200 a month, kind of a part-time job level for the people that really, really want to pursue this as a living, as a profession. For the other actors, we're not paying them, but there's a kind of an incentive program. We meet 2-3 times a month to do workshops together, to work on improv, auditioning skills, different things like that. But a lot of that is developing a visiting artist program. So I want to be able to host actors from Detroit that come in town and show them the different theaters that we have in town, allow them to audition for some local artistic directors. But I also want to be able to send our actors to other towns as well. So we're developing that program for them. So the more that they participate in the things that we're doing, they get paid opportunities to go out of town. Along with, we pay stipends for our readings. Obviously, we're paying for our productions for the actors to come in, technical designers, things like that. And then with the in-house talent agency, we're hoping to supplement their income by finding them work in film projects, commercials locally, things like that.
Is it just a happy coincidence that the Indianapolis Black Theatre Company's first production will be about a Black performer in Indianapolis?
Yeah. I kind of held off on this actual piece because, one, it had a huge cast. I was like, I don't want to go there, even though we have a budget. But also, we really want to be in that contemporary space. And so I think there's a lot of work and interest being shown towards the nostalgia of Black history. And I'm a history buff. I love the history of the Black community, not just in Indianapolis, but in Indiana in general, is fascinating. But I'm really interested in the contemporary space because I think that's a neglected space. There's a whole lot of people that could care less about historical type pieces. They want to know, like, what's happening now, what's fresh, where's the hip hop element in theater these days, or what's pressing forward the mark in Afrofuturism or sci-fi. You don't see Black people in the future. So we're really interested in that space. So putting this one on was really, I want to do one that's kind of a disruptive piece, maybe comedy driven, but then also do something that's a little more community driven. And this is a great piece to do that anybody, whether you're Black, white, wherever you are in a community, it's really relevant because it's Indianapolis history that we should be proud of, and we should be putting that to the forefront.
There's so much there. I mean, there's so much there.
A lot.
Yeah. Well, this was great. Well, we should check in a year or two and find out how things are going.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks so much for coming by and letting us know.
This is great. It's good to have platforms where people can hear what's new and what's fresh and what's upcoming. So we really hope that people will come out and check us out. And a lot of our thrust is going to be through our social media too, because I've got all these actors and we've got writers to write scripts. So there's going to be a lot of material coming out. So you should definitely check out our Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. We're going to be up to a few things.
All right. We'll check it out. Thank you. My thanks again to Ben Rose. And you can read more about him and the Indianapolis Black Theatre Company in the latest issue of IBJ, in an interview with IBJ arts reporter Dave Lindquist. And folks, before you get on with the rest of your week, there are a few other stories in this week's IBJ I want to draw to your attention. First up, a financial firm with Central Indiana ties is under investigation by the FBI, which says it suspects the firm's executives of using investor money to carry out a long-standing fraud scheme. Reporter Susan Orr has the details. Also in this week's IBJ, Daniel Bradley reports on the friction in Sheridan between the Indy area's suburban growth and the residents who want strict controls on development to preserve the area's rural feel. And Kate Sharon explains how Indiana is beginning to leverage federal funds at its 3 federally designated technology hubs to accelerate the state's standing as a high-tech sector and to build a stronger workforce. And again, you can find these stories in the latest print edition of IBJ or online at ibj.com. And thanks again for making time this week for the IBJ podcast. I'm Mason King. Hang in there, everybody. We'll be back again next week.